Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. EQA Nostalgia here, and today I want to talk to you guys about Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare. This is one of those games for me that just kind of came out of nowhere. I did not see it coming. I hadn't heard anything about it really. I only seen the title and assumed that it was another tower defense game that I really wouldn't be interested in. Which is kind of strange because I do like tower defense games, and I heard about Plants vs. Zombies a few years ago. I picked up a copy for my wife actually. I picked up a copy of the game and actually got her one of the Conehead zombie figures that they were selling. And I seen her playing the game and it looked interesting to me, but I was into other things. So when I heard about Garden Warfare, I just assumed it was a sequel. You know, it was just another one, and I hadn't played the original, so I wasn't interested. But as soon as I seen a review for the game, I immediately knew that I wanted to play it. And it kind of reminds me of Team Fortress 2. I know a lot of people have said this, but it does. It reminds me of Team Fortress 2 if Team Fortress 2 was a third-person shooter. So I guess it reminded me a little bit more of Monday Night Combat, which is a game that I really enjoyed when it first came out. So naturally, when I seen Plants vs. Zombies, I was interested in that aspect, and I knew better than to just dismiss it as a casual game, because I know a lot of people are going to look at this and they're going to say, well, this looks casual. It's colorful, and it looks kind of childish, and it's not something that I'm going to be into because, you know, most of the people that play shooters, they're into, Call of Duty and Battlefield and more mature settings, blood and guts and mud and grit and all that stuff. But I'm kind of getting a little tired of that. And the reason why I'm getting tired of that is because there's so much of that on the market now that it's just crowded. The space is completely crowded with these realistic shooters. So, I think it's a breath of fresh air to have a game that's colorful and stylized. And that brings me to the next point I wanted to make, is the graphics in the game are gorgeous. Everything from the lighting to the way the stylized graphics are done. The character models are beautiful, and it just looks really nice. I mean, every color of the rainbow is represented here. And there's a thing about graphics like this, stylized graphics, that they just have more of a long lifespan. They don't look dated in 5 or 10 years. They don't show their age as much as more realistic graphics tend to do. If you take a look at the games that just come out for Xbox One and PlayStation 4, in about 5 or 10 years, those are going to look dated compared to the games that come out. Whereas this game is going to still look pretty good because it's stylized. Now, the game is currently out for Xbox One and 360, but you really can't tell that much of a difference between the two. The Xbox One seems to have a little bit of a smoother frame rate and just a little bit more detail. But either way, both versions of the game look really good, and I've been having a blast just staring at the levels. And that's another thing, the level design has been really well done. Whoever made these maps, they know what they're doing. They've made some very well balanced maps, and they're just fun to play. For some reason, I found that it was much easier to learn these maps than other shooters. Sometimes when you play a shooter, it takes a lot of time to learn, where you can snipe from or where you can do this and that from. But it doesn't really take that long in this game. You get to know the maps rather quickly, and I'm not entirely certain why that is, but I think it's just because they were so well done. Now, the only time I found that it takes a little bit longer to learn a map is in gardens and graveyards. And that actually brings me to my next point, the different modes that are available to play within the game. When the game first released, it had 4 different multiplayer modes, but with the latest DLC we now have 5. The first mode is called Vanquish, and it's essentially just a team deathmatch. It's very straightforward. The second mode is called Gardens and Graveyards, and that's essentially just like the Conquest mode from the Battlefield series. The zombie team has to capture several gardens leading up to the final garden where they plant explosives to win the match, and the plants have to defend. And then of course you have the co-op mode, which is very fun. Essentially the plants have to defend their garden from waves of zombies, and this is the mode that's most similar to the original Plants vs. Zombies game. And just like the original Plants vs. Zombies, there's potted plants scattered around the garden that you can actually plant to help defend the garden from the zombies. Now, the potted plants actually make an appearance in gardens and graveyards as well, but to counteract that, they let the zombies spawn NPC zombies that help to attack. You also have split-screen co-op, but it's online only and it's only for the Xbox One, so I'm assuming a lot of people aren't going to be playing that one. And last but certainly not least, the latest DLC gave us access to a mode called Gnome Bomb. And basically what that is kind of like a demolition mode where the plants and the zombies both fight over a bomb, and they have to plant it 3 times in order for their team to win. Now, I've only played this mode once because it came out just yesterday, but I've heard people say that it's a little unbalanced in the way that the plants have a bit of an advantage over the zombies, just because of the chili bean ability that the pea shooter has. And that brings me to my next point, the character classes in the game. There's a total of 8 classes available, 4 on each team. The plants have access to the pea shooter, sunflower, chomper, and cactus. Now the pea shooter is pretty unique in the way that he kind of functions like a shotgunner, but he can shoot really far away. His fire rate is probably about the speed of a standard pump shotgun, but it does a lot of damage, and it also has splash damage if you manage to land it somewhere near the zombies. The pea shooter also has access to the pea gatling, which essentially roots him in one spot. He becomes immobile, but he does a lot of rapid fire damage. Now it's less than the standard damage, but it's a very constant stream of fire. Now it does leave him vulnerable to attack because he can't move around, but the damage makes up for it, and it's very, very good damage up close, medium range, and far away. He also has access to the chili bean bomb, which is essentially a time grenade that does a ton of damage. And last but not least is the hyper dash ability for the pea shooter, and what this does is essentially it speeds him up and lets him get around very, very rapidly, and it also enables him to jump up on the rooftops to shoot down at zombies. Now the pea shooter doesn't have a lot of health, but because he's so small and so mobile and does a lot of damage, he's extremely lethal. Next up we have the sunflower, and she's actually the healer for the team. The sunflower's main attack is called a sun pulse, and it's kind of like a machine gun, and it doesn't do a lot of damage, but it gets the job done. Now the next ability for the sunflower is very similar to the pea shooter's gatling. It's called the sunbeam, and just like the pea shooter, she becomes immobilized, but she's able to do a lot of constant damage. Next up we have the heal beam, which is pretty much the bread and butter ability for the sunflower. As long as she's within very close proximity of the other plants, she's able to maintain a constant stream of healing over time. She can also utilize this ability to heal the potted plants throughout the level. Now the last ability is called the heal flower. Now with this ability she can drop a potted plant that heals the other plants around her and can also heal herself, so it's very, very useful. Now all in all, she is a support class, but she can dish out a surprising amount of damage. But because she's so low on health and her main function is to heal her fellow plants, it's a good idea to stay in back of the pack when you play as her. Okay, so next up we have the cactus, and I really like the cactus because she is the sniper class in the game. The standard ability for the cactus is called the spike shot, and is very, very accurate, and it packs a wallop. Next up we have the tall nut battlement, which drops 2 tall nuts and 2 walnuts held together by vines. Now this ability is not to be underestimated. It's really good for shielding, and not only that, it's also good for her to hop onto and get a little bit more of a vantage point. And it's also good to kind of put up a little bit of a blockade from the zombies because it forces them to have to jump over it. And that brings me to the next ability, the potato mine. Now the potato mine used with the tall nut ability can be devastating. And the potato mines are very, very self-explanatory. They're just mines that you lay down on the ground. And the thing about it is if you do it right, you can make it so that zombies land right in them when they try to jump over the tall nut battlement. So she's very good at covering her flank and not having to worry too much about anybody sneaking up behind her. And last but not least, we have the garlic drone, and this ability is a lot of fun. It sends up a little garlic drone that can shoot down these little needles and do quite a decent amount of damage. It's also good for spotting enemies on the ground. Now she can also drop a corn strike, and it's kind of like dropping bombs on the ground. The corn kind of falls into the ground, and then it turns into popcorn, and it does a ton of damage to anything that's caught within the radius. Very, very good for taking out a group of zombies or teleporters that the zombies happen to be using. Now overall, she does not have a lot of health. She's not very good at a close distance because it is pretty tricky to try to hit someone up close. If you're good enough, however, and you're clever enough, you can trick the zombies into following you into potato mines. So I would recommend staying back, but if you're good enough with her, you can charge forward and kind of create a little bit of havoc. Okay, so that brings me to the final class for the plants, and that is the Chomper. Now the Chomper is unique in the way that he is the only melee character in the game, and he's a very, very stealthy character. You will not get very far if you charge out there in the open because you have no way of defending yourself at a distance, really. So the Chomper's basic ability is Chomp, which is very self-explanatory. He just chomps at the air, and he does a decent amount of damage in doing so. The trick to the Chomper is to try to get behind the zombies, because if you get behind them, you get into a little sweet spot where you can instantly kill them by gulping them right down. Now, in my opinion, the most important ability is the Burrow ability, which allows the Chomper to go underneath the ground and come up underneath zombies for an instant kill. Moving while burrowed causes the timer to go quicker, so it doesn't last as long. So if you stay stationary and just kind of plant an ambush and you want to ambush the zombies, the timer goes down a lot slower. Now the next ability that the Chomper gets is called the Spikeweed, which is basically a snare that hangs the zombies upside down and gives you the opportunity to chomp on them. It also does a small amount of damage. I believe it does somewhere between 25 and 50 damage. And the last ability for the Chomper is called Goop. This is the only ability that has any kind of range. It's not very long range, but it does do damage over time when it hits the zombies, and it also slows them down, enabling the Chomper to get behind them and swallow them whole. Overall, the Chomper is tricky to learn, but he is extremely satisfying when you learn how to play with him. You have to be very, very stealthy. And he does have a decent amount of health. It's not high. I'd say it's somewhere in the middle. He has about 150 health. So he can take a little bit of punishment, but the main thing with him is to just kind of harass and defend. Now, another thing that's really cool about the Chomper is when he does swallow a zombie, they cannot be resurrected. And he's the only class that is able to do that. Now, I haven't played as a Chomper a lot, but what I have played with him, he's very, very fun. And he looks really badass. And man, it is very annoying when you get instantly killed from out of nowhere. Okay, so that brings me to the zombie classes. First up for the zombie team, we have the Foot Soldier Zombie. The Foot Soldier Zombie uses a paintball gun, which is pretty much just like an assault rifle. It does a decent amount of damage, is good for taking out single plants. The next ability for the Foot Soldier is the Rocket Jump, and that's pretty self-explanatory, but it allows him to get up to high places like rooftops. It's also very good for escape and evasion, especially when you see a Chomper coming for you. The next ability we have is the Zombie Stink Cloud. Now this ability does damage over time, but it also helps to create a little bit of a smoke screen and providing cover for him. The next ability we have is the ZPG, which is essentially an RPG, and it does a lot of damage if it hits something directly, and it can also do some pretty decent splash damage. Overall, the Foot Soldier Zombie is very well rounded. I recommend him for beginners. His health is about medium, it's only about 125, so you do want to be careful with him. He is definitely not a tanky type class. The ability for him to get up on top of the rooftop though is really nice because he can shoot long distances and avoid chompers altogether. Next up we have the Engineer Zombie. The standard attack for the Engineer Zombie is called the Concrete Launcher, and it's kind of like a grenade launcher. It does some pretty decent damage, and it also does do splash damage. One of the most useful abilities for him is the Jackhammer, which enables him to get around very rapidly and also makes it impossible for him to be chomped by the Chomper. He also totes a Sonic Grenade that's very good for stunning the plants and also will take a Chomper out of his burrow. I highly recommend the Engineer for people who are trying to kill Chompers. If you have a lot of Chompers on the plant team, you definitely want to be rocking the Engineer because he is the anti-Chomper. Now, he also has a Zombot drone, which functions just like the Garlic drone for the Cactus in that it can go up and shoot down lasers and also provide airstrikes. However, instead of using corn, he uses road cones. So this guy overall is very well rounded. I recommend him for beginners as well. And he just has a really, really powerful loadout. He kind of reminds me of a mix between a pea shooter and a Cactus. He has average health at about 125, so you do want to be careful with him, but he can pack quite a punch, and man, you know, that crowd control with that stun grenade cannot be underestimated. Okay, so next up we have the Scientist Zombie. Now this guy is the healer for the zombie team, but he also serves as a shotgunner. His primary weapon is known as the Goo Blaster, and it's a semi-automatic shotgun that does devastating damage up close and does a decent amount at mid-range. So the first ability I want to talk about is the Warp ability, which is really good for getting into combat and getting back out of it. So if you're being chased, you can warp away without any problems. It's really good for getting behind your enemy. The next ability for the Scientist is the Sticky Explodey Ball, and it can function as a sticky grenade that does stick to plants, but it also functions as a proximity mine. Whenever plants come into radius, it will explode, doing damage. Now, last but certainly not least, we have the bread and butter ability for the Scientist Zombie called the Zombie Heal Station. Now, what this does is it emits a purple goo that heals zombies over time within a close radius. Overall, the Zombie Scientist is very well rounded. He's only good at close range, and he doesn't have a lot of health, so you have to be careful with him, but he packs a punch. Now, he doesn't do as well of a job at healing as the Sunflower, but naturally he does a lot more damage and is very good at evasion. Okay, so last but certainly not least, and my personal favorite within the entire game, the All-Star Zombie. The standard attack for the All-Star Zombie is called the Football Cannon, which is essentially like a Gatling gun. Now, while the Gatling gun does not need to be reloaded, it can overheat, so you need to be careful with your shots. When it does overheat, though, it doesn't take too long to cool off and you can start firing again. Now, this weapon is really nice, and the reason why he's pretty much my favorite character is because he's devastating at close range, but also very good at a distance. So the first ability for the All-Star Zombie is known as the Sprint Tackle, and he blitzes forward, knocking back the enemy and doing some pretty decent damage. It's also good at evading the chomper and getting out of sticky situations. Next up, we have the Dummy Shield. Now this one is pretty self-explanatory, provides cover for him and his team, and I like to use it to help get people off the ground when they've been downed. It's also really good for covering your flank when you're trying to escape. Okay, so the last ability for the All-Star is known as the Imp Punt. Now this is essentially a grenade where he punts an imp, and this is pretty funny, he punts an imp at the enemy and it explodes, doing a pretty decent amount of damage. Overall, the All-Star Zombie is a beast, and he just fits my playstyle. I like him a lot. He has a lot of health at 200 health. He's very, very good at laying down suppressive fire. He does a lot of damage up close and a decent amount of damage at a distance and everywhere in between. He has a nice support ability in his Dummy Shield, and his tackle ability is really nice for disorienting the enemy. If you tackle someone and they go flying, they get all sorts of disoriented. It's hard for them to track where you are, and it's also a very good crowd control ability. Okay, so there you have it. Those are all the classes in the game. Now there are variants. They're called variants, and they kind of help you to customize your class. Just to give you guys an example, one of the variants is called the Ice Pea, and instead of a standard pea shooter, he does ice damage. Now it does less damage when it hits the target, but it's capable of rooting them in place and actually disabling their ability to attack. Another example is the Fire Pea, and that's self-explanatory as well. It does damage over time when it hits the target. I don't think it does as much damage directly, but the damage over time is very nice. Now there are a lot of variants in the game to help customize your class and kind of trick it out to be the way you want it to be. Most of the variants, however, do have trade-offs. Like, let's say you do more damage, you might have a slower reload or fire rate. You know, having an ability that does damage over time might mean that it does less direct damage. Now, the only way to get these variants is to actually get coins. You save up coins, it's the game's currency, and you can buy these foil packs of cards that come with random stuff. And I know that might turn some people off because they might just want to buy something directly, but it is nice to have kind of like a surprise when you open things up. It's like kind of like a little tiny Christmas gift. And in my opinion, part of the fun is not knowing what you're going to get. Now, you can kind of narrow down what you're going to get. There's packs that you can buy that cost more that guarantee a variant upgrade for your character. There are many different customization options for just changing the aesthetics for your character, like hats and glasses, tattoos, and things like that. There's also a wide range of consumables such as potted plants and the ability to summon zombies in gardens and graveyards. There are also consumables for resurrecting your character during garden ops, which is the co-op I mentioned earlier. There's also retries in case you do fail at garden ops. You can get up to 3 retries. Now the leveling system in the game is a little different. You don't get experience. What you have to do is you have to complete challenges. And each challenge you complete rewards you with a star. Now you might have to fill up 5 stars at level 5 in order to advance to level 6. And challenges can vary from having to kill a certain amount of an enemy or using certain abilities a certain amount of times. However, if you do find a challenge to be a little too difficult to complete, you can have consumable cards that skip challenges for you altogether. All in all, the game is extremely fun, and I have to tell you guys, I haven't had this much fun with a shooter since SOCOM, and that's saying a lot because, man, I've played a lot of shooters. Now, the game is only currently available for Xbox One and 360, but it is coming to the PC in spring, and they have teased at a PS3 and PS4 release. If you were to ask me, I would say that it's going to be available on pretty much every console, maybe even the Wii U, because this is something that Nintendo would be interested in getting their hands on. Now, really, the only negative I can see is that microtransactions are probably going to be implemented into the game, because the way that the game is set up, it looks very microtransaction friendly, and the game itself is only $30 for 360, and it's only $40 for Xbox One. But it's such a good game that I really wouldn't mind if they did that. And not only that, They give DLC bi-monthly for free. None of the DLC is ever going to cost money. The maps, the modes, everything that they add is going to be free for the game. So microtransactions can be a pain, but this game is definitely, in my opinion, well worth it. And with that having been said, I hope you will take a moment to leave a like and subscribe if you like what you see here. I thank you guys for watching, and I look forward to seeing you all in my next video.